Suppose you are a healer, tending to a fugitive prince in the healer's heart, and suddenly there are knocks on the door and a rival warrior is baying, demanding the fugitive prince's life. Now, suppose there is nowhere else to run, to hide. What would you do to save your patient's life? Paivepo. A long time ago in a faraway land, a young healer, Yemurai, sat in the great healer's heart, her body frozen in shock as three loud, quick knocks banged the door, demanding to see the patient she was tending to. The patient was not just an ordinary patient. He was a wanted fugitive, a man who had run from his kingdom of birth after claiming that he was the true king, and he had run towards this healer's grove because he claimed that inside it, and with a great healer, the true answers of his kingship lay. And now here he was, injured, hardly able to move without wincing in pain, and looking at the door terrified. "It is Pepukai who is knocking," the fugitive Prince Tsengai whispered into the silence of the heart. "If he finds me here, he will definitely annihilate me. Take this zero crest," he patted the locket that lay on his chest, "and go back to claim a kingship that was not his in the first place." But even as he spoke, Yemurai was not looking at him, but instead her eyes were on the great healer Makoni and on the identical zero crest that lay on the great healer's chest, the same crest Tsengai had come searching for, the answer to his throne. And only now, before the knock, Makoni had learnt that this young man was her grandson, but the older healer had called him an impostor, directing him to leave the grove forever. And now, Yemu wondered what Makoni would do. Would she hand the fugitive prince over? But the loud thumping raps on the door came again, and the gruff voice shouted, "Old woman, I know you are in there. Open the door." Makoni's voice, sing-songing as always, rose from the heart to the visitors at the door. "Who dares disturb an old woman's afternoon nap with so much noise, huh?" Yemu watched as the old woman's eyes darted around the plain, open heart as she half listened to the voice outside. "It is I," the voice called out. "I, the true king of Zero. I am looking for the impostor, the threat to a kingdom that you have decided to revoke treaty terms for and hide." "Ah," Makoni said, "what a strong crime you accuse me of, and what disrespect it is to barge into my grove like that. But be that as it may, allow this old woman to put on clothes to cover her body." But her eyes were searching, probing deep into Yemu's face, and in a small voice, she asked the apprentice healer, "Do you see it?" Yemu immediately knew what it was. She was a seer, seeing, smelling, sensing death way before it happened, and not once had her instincts failed her. And in response to Makoni's question, she shook her head and whispered, "No." The old woman's eyes probed Yemu's a heartbeat longer, and then she commanded softly, "Then think of a way to save his life." Yemu watched as Makoni rose and walked to the door, his step slow and deliberate. The apprentice healer felt her hand cover her wrist, and she turned to look at the injured man, who looked at her meaningfully, smiling ruefully even, before he said, "Don't worry about me. If it's time for me to meet my ancestors, then I will go." But she snatched her hand away and whispered, "It is not time." She stood and looked around, hoping to find a small cranny or crevice in which to shove the fugitive prince in, but finding none. Helplessly, she turned to look at him and mouthed, "I am sorry," just as Makoni opened the door and stepped out of it, leaving it ajar. Then she saw a pile of furs by the corner to Makoni's heart, and quickly commanded the prince, "Lie down," and ignoring his winces of pain, she grabbed the furs and piled them on him, leaving a small space for his face, quickly spreading them evenly to look as though they were simply decorating the heart. Then, noticing that she would look stupid and idle just standing in the middle of the heart, she tiptoed to the corner of the heart where she picked a pestle and a mortar and threw some random herbs and sat in a corner, lightly pounding on them, her ears straining to hear what was going on outside, her heart in her mouth with fear. Yet all the words Yemu could hear were betrayal, failure to keep treaty, destruction of the grove, revocation of the treaty. And without any inkling of what was to happen next, she almost jumped out of her seat when the door was slammed backwards and 3 burly men entered. The leader, who indeed looked princely, who Yemu assumed to be Pepukai, did a double take when he saw her before asking, "Who are you?" And without even waiting for a response, went on, "Where is the fugitive we seek?" Yemu's response was a feeble, "I don't know what you are talking about," which no one had, as the 3 men looked around the plain room. From the corner of her eye, Yemu watched as the leader glanced over at the pile of furs, and as a determination smoldered in his eyes. She watched as her heart began to beat in a furious staccato as he lifted one leg towards the furs. But just at that moment, an ear-splitting scream sounded throughout the grove, and someone shouted, "Injuries! Injuries!" and footsteps could be heard traversing the various paths of the grove. Yemu watched again as the ringleader's purpose changed, and as he said, "He could be outside, let's go and check," and watched with relief as the 3 men left. She sat rigid in the heart for a long time, not knowing whether to leave her patient or not, yet also afraid that if she overstayed, when there was a likely emergency, the 3 men would return and would now be interested on why she had remained and what she was protecting. She held her heart in her hands an hour later, when she heard the pitter-patter of feet towards the healer's hut, and prayed that it wasn't any of the 3 men. Her body sagged with relief when her friend Matirasa entered and said frantically, "The warriors looking for the fugitive have left. Makoni said to bring your patient to the wards where several injured men lie, so you can lie there in disguise. She says you should take the crest from the men and keep it." "Where is he?" Mati finished, quickly looking around the hut incredulously. Yemu pointed to the fairs and said, "Under those," and the 2 young apprentices quickly lifted them off Zingai. Yemu watched as Matirasa helped him sit up, tore off his bandages, and poured some red concoction over his side and on his clothes to look like he had been recently injured. Mati then gestured at her to take the crest off Zingai's throat. Yemu bent down to unclasp the chain from where the crest dangled, and as their hands went around his neck, their eyes, level, met, and Yemu could not help but shiver at the intense burn in his. Her hands shook, and a sensation she did not understand, yet that she knew she instantly feared, ran through her body. She tried to look away, but it was as though there was some magnet in his eyes that made it difficult for her to look away. Then he spoke, his voice low yet powerful, and with the same intense smolder as his eyes. "Thank you for taking care of me, but please take care of the crest, and whatever you do, please promise not to give it to Makoni ever." Yemu's voice came out in a small whisper. "I promise. Promise me too that even if I die, you will never give it to anyone, not even Makoni. It will be my gift to you." Yemu nodded and accepted it, clasping it to her own neck, saying, "But you will not die." And together with Matirasa, they heaved the man up, lent him their strength, and quickly transported him to the infirmary, where many wounded young men, faces contorted in various shades of pain, and winces and groans and moans emitted out of their mouths, lay. The moment Yemu entered the infirmary, she was blinded by death. She had always seen it. That was her gift, knowing when people would pass and knowing how they would pass. But that had always been on an individual basis, just a random neighbor or a relative or a passerby, and once in the infirmary, a patient, just a single passing at a time. But now, here, the walls echoed with the eerie call of the Grim Reaper, and wherever Yemu looked, the Grim Reaper moved flirtatiously, sealing the room with its hot, demonic breath. The sensation was too much for Yemu, and she found herself fighting against an invisible hand that clawed at her throat and stubborn fingers that were forcing her eyelids to close. She fought so hard until eventually she gave up. When Yemu awoke, she had no idea where she was, what day it was, and how long she had been asleep. But she saw the worried faces peering over her, and it took her a moment to realize who it was. It was the head healer Tangai, standing side by side with Makoni, and she was lying on her bed in her hut. "What happened?" Yemu said, attempting to rise. "You fainted," Tangai responded. "You just walked into the infirmary and fainted." And the memories of the Grim Reaper came flooding to her again, and Yemu fought against the weakness that threatened to swallow her over and over again. "How many?" she asked once she felt sufficiently strong to ask again. Makoni knew immediately what the apprentice meant and said, "So far 11 you've passed, but it's still not looking good." "A carnage," Yemu whispered, mainly to herself, and shuddered. "More is coming." But Tangai was already speaking, his voice harsh. "You are a healer, and you have to learn how to control your gifts when treating patients. Of what use are your healing capabilities in the world if you faint when you see patients? Who knows how many patients we could have saved today if you were in control and told us who was most at risk?" Yemu looked at him, and again she could not help but shiver at the thinly concealed malevolence in his face. She had known the first day she had arrived in the Healer's Grove that he disliked her, and though he had hardly spoken to her unless when necessary, his eyes told her exactly how he felt about her. And she too, afraid of people as she was, had always made sure she steered clear of him as much as she could. "You might as well go back home if you can't use your gifts for the good," Tangai finished dismissively, and he turned towards the door. But Makoni told him in his terms and said in a low voice, "Well, we can't punish the child for being unable to use your gift effectively. She came here to learn, and we are doing her a disfavor by not teaching her. You, Tangai," she finished, "shall be responsible in training her to harness her gift." "What?" Tangai spat as he came to stand beside Makoni. "You know very well I am the head healer in this grove, and my job is to ensure that this infirmary functions effectively. You know as well as I do that I am the one that is likely to succeed you as head healer in the grove, and you know my responsibilities are vast. I can't be responsible for teaching apprentices. They are trainers for that. Assign someone else." But the puny, bent Makoni was looking up at his tall frame and staring deep into his eyes. Then she spoke, again her voice low, but with the authority of someone whose commands had always been followed. "You shall teach her, Tangai, and I expect progress reports from you every week." Then she pointed at Yemu. "You two shall listen to him and learn." Then the older woman adjusted her can and hobbled out of the hut. Tangai waited for Makoni to disappear out of the door before he clicked his tongue with disgust. He gave Yemu a last disdainful look before turning on his heels and walking out, not even giving her a chance to ask when the first lesson would be. For 3 weeks, Yemu wandered the length and the breadth of the grove aimlessly, with no task assigned to her, as people feared another fainting episode would occur in the infirmary. In her quiet moments, she would finger the zero crest that lay in the valley between her bosom, and she would think of him. Was he still alive? Of course, he had to be. He had been healing when she last saw him, but was he still in the infirmary, or had he been discharged? It was likely he had been discharged by now, but where had he gone to, seeing that he was being hunted down, and he had no home? A part of Ye wanted to peep into the infirmary, but could not. She had been banned for a while, until at least she could learn to harness a gift. Which was where the problem was. Ever since Tangai had been assigned to teach her, he had not made even the slightest of efforts to arrange a lesson with her. Whenever they had bumped into each other in the grove, he had always looked at her with a touch of contempt and dismissiveness, and Yemu knew that he was more immersed in the task of campaigning to become great healer after Makoni's step down, and to him she was just another nuisance. Yemu, on your part, was happy that she had not been called for a meeting, for a training. She knew in her soul that she did not want to be around this man at all, and the more he postponed lessons with her, the better it was for her too. But of course, Makoni would hear that both Tangai and Yemu had not carried out their teaching-learning task, and she had asked the two of them to remain behind after the morning's assembly. The meeting had been tense, as Makoni had turned her piercing, realmy eyes first into Tangai's eyes, then into Yemu's, her stare unwavering that Yemu could not help but tremble. Then she spoke to Tangai. I hear you intend to succeed me, but I don't know what kind of leader you will be that does not respect the precepts of the grove and openly practices discrimination. I fear that the grove might be in bad hands in your care. Yemu watched her mentor to be bristling and felt Makoni's gaze on her, and she looked up. I explicitly told you that you are supposed to report to Tangai for training, yet not once have you approached him for a lesson. I see that you like flaunting my rules and the rules of this grove as this were your home. Young woman, in case you need a reminder, you need this training more than we need you here. We can get 100 other apprentices with the same gift that you have, and still you want us to beg you to do the simplest tasks. Follow the simplest rules. I see the threat of going back to the dungeons did not work on you. Now, if I see or hear that you have not reported for training, then I will have to escort you to your home personally with my dying legs. And with that Makoni granted as she lent all her strength to her walking can and rose. After she left, Tongai stood too, leered at Yemu, and then left. Realizing that there would be no better time to ask him for a lesson, Yemu stood too and ran after him. Wait, sir, she said as she tried to catch up with his long strides. Tangai stopped but did not turn to her, and Yemu had to speak to his back. When can I come for a lesson, sir? She asked. Tonight, he said, his voice curt, dismissive, before the moon rises. Be early. If you are late, don't bother to come. She was there before the sun had even set, and before the full moon rose. She knocked on the door for a while, but nobody answered. He was probably still in the infirmary, she thought to herself, and went to sit on a bench facing the door to his heart. It was dusk when he came, and he stopped by the door, eyeing her for a while before he said, And where are your healing tools? You came to a lesson with no tools? Yemu bristled and said, bowing, I am sorry, sir. Let me run to fetch them. But he stole her with a finger and said, On whose time? You want me to wait for you as you get prepared? I am sorry, Yemu said, head still bowed. Get in, he said after a heartbeat. We will learn with what we have in this heart. Yemu's hackles rose as soon as she entered the room, for it looked more like a shrine than an ordinary heart. Around the walls of the heart, small, multicolored candles flickered with a whimsy flame, and they seemed to hug the centerpiece of the heart tighter. For in the middle of the room was a small wooden door, with multicolored skin falling off its head to its cheeks. But it was the door's eyes that were eerie and almost human-like, and they now stared at Yemu unblinking. Yemu could not ignore the pimples that rose across her skin. It was as though a cold breeze had exhaled on her in this uncharacteristically warm room. But Tangai had seen her gaze, and he chuckled dismissively. My inheritance from my grandmother, who was a real witch. It sees into the past, the present, the future. I use it now for the good of this grove." Then he turned to look at her with an intense stare and in a cold voice said, "I see everything. I know everything." Before he turned and pointed to a spot by a corner of the hut. "Sit there." She sat and waited, trying hard not to look over to the door, which seemed to have shifted angles and was now watching her. She knew the policies in the grove, that no occultic practices, no witchcraft, no dark magic was to be practiced in its walls, and she knew from experience that when one came into the grove, they were thoroughly searched, and all suspicious objects were thrown into the fire. Yet why had Tangai kept this door? And did Makoni know? Yemu was sure the great healer knew, because she had seen her come out of this heart once. But why had she allowed it? The questions were unanswered, because at that moment Tangai came to her, holding a calabash of water. "Look into the waters," he said gruffly. "Imagine that water is a calm river. Picture it in your head. That is your lesson." And he walked away to another corner of the hut, leaving Yemu to her own devices. Yemu stared into the calabash foolishly, her mind failing to conjure an image of a calm river. She stared into the calabash until her eyes watered and began to drop into the basin. She sat in that one position, her neck beginning to cramp in soreness, and yet she was afraid to look up, for she could feel eyes watching her, and she was not sure if it was the door or Tangai. After what seemed like an interminable amount of time, where Yemu was beginning to think that the sun had set and a new day had begun, she heard Tangai clearing his throat and his footsteps as he walked towards her. "That's it for now," he said, his voice still gruff. "You can go." Yemu wanted to ask if that was all, but as she rose, she could see he was distracted. He was looking at her throat, at the nape of her bosom, and for a moment she was confused as to why her cleavage would entrance him. But then she remembered the crest, Zingai's crest that sat at her throat, and there was some longing, some greed that flickered in Tangai's eyes. He was startled when Yemu asked half-heartedly, "When is the next lesson?" He had to tear his eyes from the crest, and the omnipresent malice in his eyes returned. "The day after tomorrow," he replied. "Come after the moon has risen. Don't be late." Then with a slight wave towards the door, he shooed her out. 2 days later, Yemu was back for her lesson. It had been with great reluctance she had even come, but she knew she had no option, so she trudged from her hut in the western edge of the grove to Tangai's hut at the opposite edge. She had gotten to the door and rolled her fist into a knock when she heard voices in the hut, and when one particular voice told her mid-knock, "Let me in the infirmary," the particular voice said, and Yemu immediately recognized it. It was Zingai's pursuer, Pepokai. "Let me just check if he is still there or not, because even if we get the crest from the girl, as long as he is alive, he will continue to cause havoc in my kingdom." But Tangai was speaking now. "No, it cannot happen. The infirmary is heavily guarded at the moment, and the guards will be on high alert should they see a stranger there. Listen, I will get the crest from the girl. She is an easy one. No one will challenge you then after I get it from the girl and the great healer. You will have 2 crests." Pepokai was speaking and said, "If you do this for me, I will owe you even more, and I will help you in taking control of this grove. Just imagine the control you will have as the great healer. Just imagine the control you will have over all these kingdoms and the power you can unleash. Please, give me the injured boy, and I will give you the world." Yemu stood, stuck in her spot, her ears refusing to believe what they were hearing as she waited for Tangai's response. Yet Tangai's response came from too close, for he said, "There is someone here. we have an audience. And the door was wrenched open with so much force that Yemo almost tumbled into the entryway. But she steadied herself and looked up at the man who stood before her as his eyes glinted at her malevolently. And Yemo's breath caught in her throat as she realized that this could as well be her last breath. To be continued. Thank you guys for watching and watching all the way to the end. I appreciate you being here. This story is part of a series of stories set in a pre-colonial African hospital, and it explores the intrigue and mystery surrounding the hospital and its characters. Please do tune in next week, same time for the next installment. Also, do not forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share with other peeps. Lots of love and goodbye.